It started as an ordinary routine in the Johnson family's quiet suburban home. Every morning after breakfast, their loyal golden retriever, Max, would wag his tail, wait by the front door, and then disappear for a few hours. At first, no one thought much of it. He was a friendly dog, loved to roam, and always came back before evening. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah Johnson, the mother of 2 kids who adored Max, began to notice a strange pattern. No matter how early or late she let him out, he always vanished for exactly 3 hours. Something about it began to bother her, a quiet worry she couldn't shake off. Her husband, Tom, brushed it off, laughing that Max probably found a girlfriend in the neighborhood. The kids giggled at that, imagining Max going on secret doggy dates. But Sarah wasn't convinced. Max wasn't the kind of dog to wander far. He had always been protective of their youngest child, Lily, who had trouble walking after an accident last year. Max rarely left her side. So where was he going every day? And why did he return with a tired look, sometimes even a little muddy or wet, like he'd been through something he couldn't explain? One rainy afternoon, when Max came home later than usual, Sarah noticed something strange. There was a faint red mark on his paw, almost like a scrape. Her heart skipped a beat. Had he been hurt? She gently cleaned his paw and looked into his warm, trusting eyes. He licked her hand as if to say, "Don't worry," but that only made her curiosity stronger. That night, she told Tom, "Tomorrow I'm finding out where he goes." Tom shrugged, half asleep, but Sarah's mind was racing. Something deep inside told her that Max's secret wasn't simple. The next morning, Sarah tied a small GPS tracker to Max's collar, one Tom used for his hikes. She felt a little guilty, like she was invading her dog's privacy, but she needed to know. As usual, Max barked cheerfully and trotted out the door, tail wagging. Sarah sat by her phone, watching the little blue dot move across the digital map. At first, it seemed random down the street, through a small park, past a row of houses. But then the dot stopped at an old, run-down part of town, near the abandoned railway yard. Her stomach tightened. Why would Max go there? When Max returned home, wet and exhausted, Sarah noticed his paws were darker, caked with mud. The GPS had done its job, but it wasn't enough. She needed to see it with her own eyes. The next day, she hid a small camera in Max's collar, a discreet one her brother had once used for nature filming. She kissed Max on the head, whispered, "Be careful, boy," and let him go. Her heart pounded the whole time he was gone. She tried to distract herself with chores, but every creak of the house made her glance at the clock. 3 hours later, Max came back, just as usual, happy tail wagging, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. That evening, when the kids went to bed and the house grew quiet, Sarah connected the tiny camera to her laptop. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. At first, it was ordinary footage. Max sniffing flowers, chasing a butterfly, running joyfully down familiar streets. But soon, the scenery changed. He crossed into the old part of town, where broken fences leaned and the grass grew tall. Then the frame steadied on something that made Sarah cover her mouth in shock. Max was walking toward a small makeshift shelter, a torn blanket, a few old boxes, and inside, a man. The man looked thin, frail, and wrapped in layers of old clothes. His beard was messy, his eyes tired. He sat against the wall, shivering, and then Max approached him gently, tail wagging low, almost respectfully. The man smiled faintly and patted Max's head. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched Max drop something from his mouth. A sandwich, her sandwich, from the kitchen counter. Every day, the next morning, Sarah didn't put the camera on Max. She didn't need to. Instead, she followed him quietly, keeping a distance. The cold morning wind brushed against her face as she trailed him through the streets, her heart pounding in her chest. When Max reached the old yard again, she stopped behind a fence. There he was, the same man sitting with his blanket. Max gently placed a piece of bread in his lap. The man smiled and whispered something, stroking Max's fur. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she realized her dog had a heart far purer than most humans. She stepped forward, unsure what to say. The man looked up, startled. But before he could speak, Sarah smiled softly. "He's been feeding you, hasn't he?" she said. The man nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I didn't mean no harm," he murmured. "I tried to stop him, but he kept coming. He saved my life." Sarah knelt beside Max, hugging him tightly. "You're a good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Max wagged his tail, unaware of how deeply he had changed her heart that day. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. The image of the homeless man and her golden-hearted dog replayed in her mind over and over. She kept wondering how long Max had been doing this. Days? Weeks? Maybe months? She remembered the first time she noticed food missing from the counter and how she scolded him gently for it. Now she felt ashamed. All that time Max had been quietly taking from them to give to someone who had nothing. Sarah turned to Tom, who was half asleep, and whispered, "He's been feeding a homeless man." Tom's eyes opened slowly, disbelief in his gaze. She nodded, tears shimmering. "Our dog has been saving a life." The next morning, Tom joined her as they prepared sandwiches and a thermos of hot soup. They placed them in a basket and waited for Max to signal his usual departure. When he barked and trotted toward the door, they followed at a distance. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves crunched under their shoes as they shadowed him through winding streets. When they finally reached the old railway yard, Max was already sitting beside the man, his tail brushing the ground. The man looked up and froze when he saw them approaching. His hands trembled as if expecting anger or blame, but Sarah smiled softly and knelt beside him, placing the basket down. "We thought Max could use some help with his deliveries." The man's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "They didn't mean for anyone to find out. He just started coming one day, bringing me food. I didn't have the heart to send him away." Sarah shook her head, smiling through her tears. "You don't have to explain. He chose you." Tom extended his hand. "I'm Tom," he said gently. "This is Sarah, and that superhero there is Max." The man laughed weakly, shaking Tom's hand. "My name's Daniel," he replied softly. "I used to be a construction worker before I lost my job. Then everything just fell apart." His voice broke as he spoke, eyes full of shame and gratitude. They sat with him for a while, sharing food and conversation. Sarah learned that Daniel had been living alone near the tracks for nearly a year, surviving mostly on scraps and the kindness of strangers, though none as consistent as Max. The dog sat proudly beside him, head resting on Daniel's knee, as if guarding his secret all this time. Sarah realized that their dog hadn't just fed the man, he'd given him something far greater: companionship, trust, and hope. She wiped her eyes and promised Daniel they would help him get back on his feet. Daniel protested weakly, but Sarah's tone left no room for argument. "If Max believes in you, then so do we." Over the next few weeks, the Johnson family began visiting Daniel regularly. The kids, Lily and Jake, adored him and would bring him hot chocolate and cookies every Saturday. Tom made calls to some of his old friends in construction, trying to find Daniel a job. Sarah spoke with a local shelter about finding him a temporary room until he got steady work. Through it all, Max was the bridge that connected them, always running ahead, tail wagging proudly, as if knowing he'd brought two worlds together. The family's daily life felt different now, richer and more meaningful. Every time Max returned from his morning emissions, Sarah would smile instead of worrying, knowing he was visiting an old friend. One chilly evening, when Sarah came home from work, she found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Tom. "Went with Daniel to meet the foreman, fingers crossed." She felt a surge of excitement and fear. Hours later, the door creaked open, and Tom walked in, grinning. Behind him was Daniel, wearing a clean jacket and holding a small paper in his hand, his new job contract. Sarah gasped in joy. "Have they hired you?" Daniel nodded, his eyes bright. "They said they needed good workers, and Tom convinced them to give me a chance." Max barked excitedly, circling Daniel, sensing the happiness in the air. That night they celebrated with a warm dinner, laughter, and stories. Daniel told them about his late wife, and how he had once dreamed of opening a small repair shop. Sarah noticed how the light had returned to his eyes. It was as if Max's kindness had reignited something in him that the world had taken away. Lily hugged him tightly before bed and said, "Your family now." Daniel smiled with tears in his eyes, whispering a thank you, all of you. The family's home, once just a quiet corner of suburbia, became a symbol of compassion. Visitors came by to meet Max, calling him the angel dog. Daniel would smile shyly, always saying, "I'm just lucky he found me." Sarah knew better. Max hadn't just found Daniel, he had found purpose, and through him, taught them all a lesson they would never forget. Love didn't need words, money, or recognition. Sometimes it only needed a wagging tail and a heart that understood pain. And sometimes the smallest creature could carry the biggest message of all. Time passed gently as seasons changed around the Johnson home. The snow melted into spring, the garden bloomed, and laughter once again filled the air. Daniel was no longer the lonely man by the railway tracks. He was now Uncle Dana to the kids, sharing stories of his workdays and teaching Jake how to fix things around the house. Every morning, Max would still trot to Daniel's place, not to bring food anymore, but simply to say hello. It had become their ritual, a quiet bond that no one could ever fully understand, but everyone deeply respected. The town began to recognize both of them as local heroes, the man who rebuilt his life, and the dog who never stopped believing in him. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch, Sarah watched Max lying peacefully at Daniel's feet. The golden fur shimmered under the sun, and she felt her throat tighten with emotion. She turned to Tom and whispered, "You realize, don't you? He didn't just save Daniel. He saved us too." Tom nodded, eyes soft with understanding. Before Max's secret was revealed, their lives had been busy, detached, work, chores, screens, and silence. But since then, something had changed. Compassion had become their new rhythm. The small things mattered again: family dinners, warm conversations, morning walks. Max had taught them how to be human again. Years rolled by, and Daniel flourished in his new life. He opened a tiny repair shop called Second Chance Fixes, a name that made everyone smile knowingly. The Johnsons helped him design the sign, and Max was, of course, the logo, a golden retriever with kind eyes and a sandwich in his mouth. Business picked up fast, not just because of his skill, but because people loved the story behind it. Daniel never forgot where it all began. A photo of him and Max, taken by the news crew years ago, hung on the shop wall with a small plaque beneath it that read, "Sometimes angels wear fur." Max grew older, his muzzle turning white, his steps slowing with time. Yet every time Daniel came by, his tail still wagged with the same youthful joy. The family cherished every moment with him, each walk, each cuddle, each sunset shared on the porch. They knew he wasn't just a pet. He was a legacy of love and kindness. One quiet evening, Lily, now a teenager, sat beside Max and whispered, "You made me believe in miracles." He licked her hand, eyes warm and gentle, as if to say, "They were always real. You just had to look closer." When the day finally came for Max to rest, it felt like the entire town mourned. People gathered at the Johnsons' yard, holding candles and flowers. Daniel stood silently by the tree where Max used to nap, tears streaming down his face. "He gave me my life back," he said softly. Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder, "and he gave us all a reason to love harder." They buried Max under that tree, wrapping him in his favorite blanket, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched. Even the breeze that day felt different, gentler, like a whisper of gratitude carried through the air. In the months that followed, Daniel visited every week to tend to the small garden that grew around Max's resting place. He planted daisies, saying they matched Max's spirit, bright, pure, and full of life. The Johnsons often joined him, sharing coffee and stories of their golden friend. It wasn't long before children from the neighborhood began stopping by, leaving little drawings or bones near the tree, calling it a Max's Corner. It became a place of quiet reflection, a reminder that kindness never truly dies. One summer morning, Daniel arrived with a small box in his hands. Inside was a golden retriever puppy with big, curious eyes. He smiled through tears as he said, "I think Max would have wanted me to take care of this little one." Sarah's heart melted instantly. The kids squealed with joy, and Tom chuckled, wiping his eyes. They named the puppy Hope. She had Max's same spark, that same gentle energy, as if a piece of him had returned to remind them that love always finds its way back. Life continued, touched by the silent lessons Max had left behind. The Johnsons and Daniel still met every weekend, walking Hope through the same park where Max once ran. Strangers would stop and smile at the sight, some recognizing them from the story that had once moved millions. Every time someone on quiet nights, Sarah would sit by the window, looking out at Max's corner glowing softly under the porch light. Sometimes she swore she could still hear his collar jingling faintly in the wind. It brought her peace, not sadness, because she knew that even though Max was gone, his spirit lived on in Daniel, in her children, in every act of kindness that rippled outward from that one secret journey long ago. A dog had once disappeared for hours every day, and when the truth came out, it changed everything. In the end, the world learned that sometimes love wears four paws and leaves behind footprints that never fade.